Now, before you say this guy's full of shit, I progressively overload and I think it's the way to go. I'm not here to argue with you. If it works for you, keep doing it. Just for me, never worked that well. So if you're watching this and you feel like you're busting your ass, but you're not getting the results you want, and you're focused on what I would deem the wrong thing, which is how much weight you can lift, it's not going to work for you either.
So first things first, it's important to understand that progressive overload does not automatically mean lifting heavier weight. That's technically not what progressive overload is. Lifting heavier is one possible method of progressive overload. And yeah, for novices and most intermediates, it definitely should be the primary method that they focus on so that they can build up an overall size and strength foundation. But regardless of that, they're still not the same thing. Progressive overload basically just means that you are overloading the muscle, so you're training it hard enough to stimulate a growth response, and that you're doing that in a progressive fashion over time so that you can stimulate further and further gains. Now that could mean lifting a heavier weight, but it could also mean doing more reps with the same weight. It could mean making a given weight more challenging by adjusting the tempo or the angle of the lift, which is what Ryan mainly focuses on in his videos. It could mean performing more volume using advanced techniques like rest pause, drop sets, cluster sets, forced reps, cheat reps. Those are all methods of progressive overload, as I've mentioned many times before. And ultimately, progressive overload is what drives the entire muscle building process from the ground up. You have to overload the muscle in some way, and you have to do it progressively over time. If you don't create sufficient overload, then growth doesn't get stimulated. And if you don't do it progressively, then you're just going to plateau and get stuck in one spot. So even if you are doing the style of training that Ryan shows in his videos with the lighter weight, higher rep, more isolated approach, you still have to overload the muscle and employ some method of progression to continually build new muscle. And ideally, it should be some type of method that you're actively tracking and that you can quantify in some way. And this might just sound like semantics, but in my opinion, if people have the idea in their head that they don't need to progressively overload, that they should just go into the gym and train intuitively with different exercises all the time, depending on how they feel that day, without tracking anything and without worrying about the load on the bar, very often, unless they're fortunate enough to have really good genetics or they are pharmaceutically enhanced in some way, they're probably going to end up running around in circles and progressing a lot slower than they ultimately could be. Now, advanced lifters who have already built a good portion of their muscle and they know their bodies and their strength levels really well, they might be totally fine with that type of instinctive training approach. And again, if you add PEDs and genetic factors on top of it, then that's also going to play a big role. Ryan's open about the fact that he's on TRT, which does have a pretty significant muscle building advantage versus training naturally. So that is something to factor in. But yeah, if you do fall into any of those camps, then you probably don't need to listen to what I'm saying here. But for the typical natural novice to intermediate lifter, which is going to make up the vast majority of people watching these videos, instinctive lightweight training without tracking load or striving for progressive weight increases, that is not going to be the best approach in my opinion. And I don't think very many experienced fitness coaches would ultimately argue with that. I would say that Ryan's training style is definitely the more outlier approach, at least as far as natural lifting is concerned.
Let's first talk about how most people progress to the sets of an exercise. Let's use standing dumbbell curl, for example. They'll walk to the rack, do an easier set, and they'll go, okay, I'm going to go up. They go up. It gets a little tougher. Maybe they go up again and they go, oh, that's too heavy. They either keep that same weight, they drop back down, and that's their exercise. To me, that's all wrong.
So yeah, I totally get the point that he's trying to make here. And I agree, it really is a terrible approach to just go into the gym and start swinging heavier and heavier weights around purely for the sake of it and ego lifting like a complete tool, either to try to impress people in the gym who ultimately don't care how much weight you can lift anyway, or because you think that that is the best way to grow. I've done videos talking about this many times before. Your chance for injury will go way up if you do that, and you'll just be making the exercise less effective overall. So if you are someone who's really far on that ego lifting side of the spectrum and you're just aimlessly stacking on the weight without considering how your technique is being effective, then Ryan's advice may very well be what you need to pull yourself back to reality, to clean up your form, take the stress off your joints, and to maximize the tension on the muscles that you're actually trying to target. But at the same time, ultimately, the example that he's giving here is of someone who isn't applying weight increases in the correct way. So we can't take that example and then say that progressive overload or lifting heavier is ineffective. It's only ineffective if you don't apply it properly.
I think a better way to look at it is after that first set, instead of just unconsciously thinking, okay, I need to add more weight, instead just think of how can I connect this exercise better? Or how do I make sure that this is the best exercise for me to do?
So keep in mind that progressive overload doesn't mean that you have to constantly go heavier. from set to set within a given workout. As far as adding weight is concerned, it's really just an overarching way of saying that you need to gradually increase the load on your exercises over time, okay, slowly over the course of weeks and months and years in small gradual increments while maintaining proper form. If you increase the weight and your form takes a significant hit as a result of that, then yeah, you need to slow down and you need to keep working with the previous weight before you try to go back up again. But I honestly don't know of any truly successful lifters, particularly naturals, who actually built significant muscle mass without building up a basic strength base on the compound lifts first and foremost. It just doesn't happen in the real world, except in a small percentage of outliers who are probably going to grow no matter how they train. But that is the exception, it's not the norm. And it doesn't have to be this black and white thing either, where you're lifting very light weights and focusing completely on the mind-muscle connection, or you're maxing out with sloppy form and aimlessly chasing numbers. In reality, the best approach is going to fall somewhere in the middle. It's not going to be found out at the extremes.
But I still think it's a good idea to always test different angles, tempo, mechanical disadvantages, range of motion, because you never know what you're going to connect with that day. And for me, connection is everything.
It's not like your physical anatomy, your bone structure and your muscle insertions are magically going to change from day to day. And it's this moving target where one week a barbell curl is going to activate your biceps effectively, and then next week all of a sudden it stops working and you have to recalibrate and find a different biceps exercise and figure out, how many degrees to twist your pinky and the precise geographical coordinates to position your elbow at, and which exact cable attachment to use for that specific workout to get your biceps to wake up from their deep sleep.
I can figure out, what's the best way I connect on that particular day, because it changes all the time.
If an exercise activates a given muscle effectively today, there's no reason why it all of a sudden is going to stop activating that muscle next week or next month or next year, assuming that you're using the same form and the same technique. Experiment with different lifts in the overall picture, yes, but you don't need to be doing this on a constant workout to workout basis. Most people are going to be far better off to just find a solid set of lifts that hit all of the basic movement patterns and that work well and feel good for them, and then stick to those lifts for a consistent period of training in order to master the technique and progressively overload them. That's going to be a better approach than just constantly bouncing around in the gym, switching from one movement to another, and only making minimal progress on each one. And by the way, if you want to cut through all the conflicting information out there and just get yourself onto a solid, structured step-by-step program that you can follow, including the weekly split, exercises, sets and reps all mapped out based on your current goals and your condition, then you can head over to seannell.com/custom once this video is over. Just fill out the form there and I'll send you back a free training and nutrition plan to get you onto the proper path without wasting any of your valuable time or effort. You can click up here or use the link in the description box below.
Also, this is a long-term play because you can't lift heavy for years. It's only a matter of time before something gives out.
So yeah, there's definitely some truth to that. If your primary goals are hypertrophy related, then just trying to go heavier and heavier and heavier indefinitely forever, that's not always going to be the best approach, because you might eventually reach a point where the cost of adding more weight might not be worth it for your joints, and where it would be more practical and more effective to just mix in other methods of progressive overload like I mentioned before. But I would say that that depends on the specific exercise, because you can add weight to bigger compound lifts for a much longer period of time before that's going to be a concern, whereas for smaller isolation movements, it could be an issue sooner. And this also applies much more in, let's say, the late intermediate to more advanced stages of lifting. And I think that's a very important piece of context that needs to be mentioned. The vast majority of people watching these YouTube videos are nowhere near strong enough yet to where adding more weight is going to be an injury risk, or where they're going to lose the connection to the muscle. It takes a long period of sustained proper lifting and consistent strength gains until that might become an issue.
That's why I'll never understand why some people say, why can't he just do regular exercises? Why is he trying to reinvent the wheel? Same reason you don't use those waterbed style dumbbells or the plastic ones with the concrete on the inside. When you drop it, it cracks in half. Because they fucking suck.
I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, traditional exercises obviously work great because we have a pretty much endless amount of real world evidence that they do. Most people throughout history with impressive physiques built most of their muscle that way, but I think these new modified versions are better. That would be much more reasonable, but it's a very different thing to just outright say that traditional exercises fucking suck. Squats, deadlifts, Free weight presses, overhead presses, pull-ups, rows, proven exercises that have been the bread and butter in the majority of successful lifters programs for probably the past 100 years. Exercises that through basic progressive overload have put more muscle on people's frames than anything else in existence. And to say that these time-tested lifts fucking suck, I mean, that's just a pretty obvious exaggeration. Again, if someone thinks that there are more effective variations available, then I'd say that's fine. But to say that conventional lifts suck is just obviously not true. They were effective enough in Ryan's case that he put in the years of consistent heavy compound training necessary to be able to deadlift 585 for touch and go reps and bent over row 375 and do full range of motion leg presses with 11 plates aside. Okay, no one gets to these kinds of numbers through lightweight isolation training. It takes years of heavy, intense training to move that kind of weight, and it doesn't look to me like he was lacking in muscle mass back then either. Now, maybe he did a mix of heavier and lighter training, but heavy compound lifting clearly played an important role there if he got up to those kinds of numbers. And maybe he really did switch 100% over to the lightweight high rep approach over the past year, and he really does firmly believe now that that's what's best. If so, fair enough. You know, people are allowed to change their beliefs over time. But to say that progressive overload and heavy compound lifting sucks and that it never worked for him, that just doesn't add up when you consider his previous strength levels and his muscle mass and the previous recommendations that he gave really not that long ago. Not to mention the endless real-world evidence that it does work extremely well for the lifters who do apply it properly.
Once you lose the ability to purposely engage the muscle you're trying to work, because you're obviously trying to get that fucking weight off your back, the benefit of adding weight doesn't outweigh the loss of control.
I would say that I agree with the general point that adding weight at the expense of form is a very bad way to approach your training, and for a wide variety of reasons. Proper technique should always be considered as an absolutely primary factor during your workouts before anything else. But that doesn't mean that progressive overload doesn't work or that the load on the bar isn't something that you should pay attention to. It just means that as you build your size and strength up and as you do increase the weights, you need to do it slowly and patiently, and you need to make sure that you're maintaining proper form with each increase. High rep mind muscle isolation work can definitely be included in that. It can provide its own unique benefits, especially depending on the muscle group, and I do include it in my workouts as well, but it just shouldn't be the primary focus or the only style of training that you use. So thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to grab your free training and nutrition plan from me over at seannall.com/custom. On the supplementation side of things, you can also visit realscienceathletics.com to check out my research-backed, no BS supplements that I personally formulated to help fully streamline your fitness program and maximize your muscle building and fat burning results without all the regular BS hype and gimmicks that are so common in the industry nowadays. We've been getting tons of positive feedback on these products lately, and I really appreciate all the support. And you can use coupon code YouTube15 to save 15% off your entire first order. You can follow me over on Instagram for more tips and updates. And as always, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already in order to stay up to date on future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.